In the thick forests of upstate New York, 143 unmarked graves were discovered in 1862 beneath the floorboards of an abandoned church. Local authorities documented that each skeleton showed signs of systematic abuse, broken bones that had healed. Over time, evidence of repeated near drowning and strange carvings etched into their bones. For more than 160 years, federal records on the Church of the Pure Spirit remain sealed, accessible only with special clearance. But now I've obtained documents never before made public. They reveal how three brothers, Elder Ezra, Deacon Silas, and Prophet Caleb Ravencroft, convinced hundreds of followers that salvation could only come through suffering, and how their rituals led to what may be one of the darkest religious cults in American history. Ravenwood, the town they settled in, was small and mostly unremarkable. Located about 40 miles north of Albany, it was home to roughly 300 people who survived on farming, timber, and trade. Founded in 1803 by settlers from the Hudson Valley, Ravenwood soon found itself caught up in the religious fever of the Second Great Awakening. This was a time of spiritual upheaval, when old denominations were questioned and new ones flourished. The region became known as the burned-over district due to the wave of revival movements that swept through. Preachers drew huge crowds, beliefs were shifting, and into the setting. In the summer of 1825 came the Ravencroft brothers. Elder Ezra, the oldest at 42, had a commanding presence and intense eyes that seemed to see straight through people. Deacon Silas, 39, had a scholarly air, thin, quiet, always writing, and Prophet Caleb, the youngest at 35, had an eerie presence that unsettled many. His pale blue eyes often rolled back during visions, and his soft-spoken words carried uncannily. Through crowded rooms, the brothers arrived with money and quickly bought land outside town, where they began building what they called the Church of the Pure Spirit. It wasn't like the usual white churches scattered across New York. This one was built from dark stone quarried nearby, designed with an octagonal sanctuary at the center, and 8 smaller chambers around it. The tall steeple loomed over the forest, and the main hall had no windows, only lanterns lit the services. "We've been called by the Spirit to this place," Elder Ezra declared at their first public gathering. "In an age of false prophets, we bring the true message, purification through suffering." The timing couldn't have been better. The religious world of 1825 was shifting fast. Older churches like the Episcopalians and Presbyterians were losing ground. Methodists and Baptists were gaining converts, and entirely new movements like the Mormons were just beginning. In this climate, the Ravencrofts' message struck a chord. Their teaching started out simply enough. Suffering, they preached, was the only true path to salvation. They cited scripture about being refined by fire and Christ's own suffering. But unlike others, they took these ideas literally. Pain wasn't symbolic, it was necessary. The flesh is the vessel of sin, Deacon Silas would explain calmly. It must be tested, broken, and purified. The congregation grew quickly. New members were interviewed by Prophet Caleb, who decided if they were worthy. The followers came mostly from 3 groups: the poor looking for purpose, the troubled looking for redemption, and the wealthy seeking something deeper than mainstream churches could offer. Margaret Wilkins was one of the earliest converts, a widow who had lost her entire family to illness. She had been contemplating suicide when she met Elder Ezra. "He looked at me like he could hear my thoughts," she wrote later. "He told me my pain had meaning, that it was preparing me for something greater. For the first time since my family died, I felt something other than grief." By 1827, the Church of the Pure Spirit had nearly 100 members. Some lived on site, others in town, but spent most of their time at the church. The Ravencrofts encouraged followers to give up property and savings, claiming that worldly things hindered spiritual growth. The most devoted were invited to become vessels of the Spirit, which meant enduring more intense purification. These early rituals were relatively mild: fasting, long prayer sessions, ice-cold water. But slowly, without most people noticing, the practices became harsher. Like a frog in boiling water, the followers were conditioned to accept more and more. By 1829, construction began on a network of underground rooms beneath the church. The brothers now had complete control over their followers' bodies, minds, and lives. As Prophet Caleb reportedly said in a private meeting, "The sheep have been gathered. Now begins the true work of the shepherd." That December, the church crossed a threshold. December 21st, 1829, winter solstice, the longest night of the year. What happened that night was recorded in secret church documents as the first ascension. Elder Ezra told the congregation that Prophet Caleb had received a powerful vision. That evening, nearly 150 followers gathered in the dark sanctuary, lit only by 12 candles arranged in a spiral carved into the floor, leading to a central platform. Thomas Hartford, a blacksmith who had joined the church 6 months later, escaped and gave testimony about what he witnessed. Elder Ezra's voice rose with intensity as he explained that previous rituals were only preparation. "The spirit grows impatient," he said. "Tonight, the path to true salvation is revealed." Then Prophet Caleb emerged, moving stiffly, his skin pale and eyes rolled back. He spoke in what he called the tongue of angels, a strange mix of growls and high-pitched wails. After several minutes, he collapsed. When he stood again, he spoke in his normal voice, but with a tone that mesmerized the room. He called out 3 names: Sarah Pembroke, Michael Collins, and Rebecca Winters. "The Spirit has found you worthy," he said. They were led to the platform, stripped down to undergarments despite the cold, and bound to wooden frames shaped like inverted crosses. Elder Ezra explained that turning the cross upside down wasn't blasphemy. It symbolized moving from pride to humility, from life to death to rebirth. What followed were the 7 trials of purification. First, air wet cloths over their faces while water was poured on them, simulating drowning. Then, earth packed, dirt buried them up to the neck. Fire-heated metal touched their skin, leaving pattern burns. Water, they were submerged in freezing water until unconscious. Hartford admitted his memory faltered during the final trials. He nearly fainted. But all accounts agree. The victims were told to welcome the pain as a blessing. As they cried out, the congregation chanted, "Through suffering comes purity, through purity comes elevation." Disturbingly, many followers seemed transfixed. Some wept, but others looked on with awe. Years of conditioning had worked. By dawn, the victims were limp but still alive. Elder Ezra declared them cleansed and ready to be filled with the Spirit. Then Prophet Caleb placed his hands on each of their heads and whispered something. All 3 convulsed violently, their bodies arched, bones snapped, and their eyes flew open. They began speaking in the same strange language Caleb had used earlier. By sunrise, they were dead. Elder Ezra said they had been accepted into heaven without judgment. Their bodies, now empty vessels, were to be treated as sacred relics. They were not buried but laid out on stone slabs beneath the church, where members could visit and pray. These were the first of what would eventually be hundreds of bodies placed in the underground chambers of the Church of the Pure Spirit. The next morning, some followers quietly fled. Hartford was among them, though he stayed silent for years, believing no one would believe what he'd seen. Those who stayed became more devoted than ever. The brothers had crossed a line, murder disguised as faith, and their grip only tightened. Within the church, death had become holy. As Prophet Caleb later told his brothers in a conversation recounted by a former elder, "Now they've seen the true face of God, and they didn't turn away. There's nothing they won't accept now." He was right. The first ascension was only the beginning. What followed were 3 decades of escalating horrors, hidden behind the facade of piety and devotion. From 1830 to 1845, the Church of the Pure Spirit grew more dangerous. The Ravencrofts refined their theology and developed precise methods for their so-called elevations, ritual killings cloaked in religious meaning. They kept up a public image of charity and community. They hosted events, made donations, and supported social causes like temperance and orphanages actions. That earned them respect in the wider religious world. But underground, their operation grew darker. The cellar chambers expanded into a sprawling maze of tunnels and hidden rooms, far larger than the church itself. Workers brought in for the initial construction were eventually replaced by devoted church members who could be trusted to keep secrets in time. Only those considered vessels of the Spirit, the most loyal followers were allowed to carry out the work. By 1835, the catacombs, as they were known among the church's inner circle, had grown into a sprawling underground complex with at least 7 major chambers and dozens of smaller alcoves. Each chamber had a specific role in the Ravencrofts' increasingly extreme belief system. The Chamber of Preparation, where candidates were kept in isolation; the Chamber of Trials, where they endured the 7 tortures; the Chamber of Ascension, where the final rituals occurred; and the most disturbing, the Chamber of Saints, where the bodies of the ascended were kept. Preserving the bodies became a key part of the cult's identity. Instead of burying the dead, the Ravencrofts kept the corpses in various stages of preservation. Some were partially mummified, using techniques Deacon Silas claimed to have learned from medical texts. Others were reduced to bare skeletons, through methods investigators later struggled to fully understand. These remains were displayed in carefully arranged scenes, posed in prayer or ecstasy, often wired into place to hold unnatural postures. Elizabeth Carver, who joined the church in 1832 and escaped in 1844, gave some of the clearest descriptions of these chambers. "The smell hit you first," she told federal investigators. "Not rot, like you'd expect, but a chemical stink, turpentine, alcohol, and something sweet I couldn't place. The brothers called it the scent of sanctity, but it was embalming fluid." Carver described how new members were slowly introduced to the catacombs. At first, they were spoken of in metaphor, then limited visits to less disturbing sections were allowed. Only the most trusted were permitted to witness or participate in the actual rituals. By the time you were shown the Chamber of Saints, filled with corpses arranged like a congregation, you were so deep into the belief system that it felt beautiful, not horrifying, she said. "I cried from what I thought was joy. Now I can barely live with that memory." The number of elevations rose steadily. In 1830, there were 2 known ceremonies, resulting in 5 deaths. By 1835, they occurred quarterly, taking 2 for lives each time. By 1840, they were monthly. Solstices and equinoxes became the occasions for even larger ceremonies. At first, the Ravencrofts targeted people without strong social ties, widows, orphans, and drifters. But eventually, they began selecting candidates from within the congregation itself. These choices were portrayed as a sacred privilege, according to Carver. Parents would compete to have their child chosen. They truly believed it was the highest honor. The brothers continued their distinct public roles, Ezra as the commanding leader, Silas as the intellectual, and Caleb as the spiritual channel. But privately, Caleb's influence grew as his visions began to shape more of the church's decisions. By 1840, he alone chose who would be elevated and determined the rituals used. His mental state, however, declined sharply. Journal entries found hidden in his quarters revealed disturbing thoughts and drawings. In one entry from 1842, he wrote, "The Spirit has revealed that the soul is not in the mind or heart alone, but scattered through the body in sacred nodes. Each elevation lets me map them more clearly. I'm close to knowing the divine anatomy." As church membership neared 300 by 1845, the challenge of hiding so many deaths forced the brothers to turn to a grim solution: selling bodies to medical schools. At that time, legitimate cadavers were hard to come by, and a black market had developed. Deacon Silas, using his academic ties, arranged deals with agents supplying medical schools in Albany, New York City, and even Philadelphia. Church records from 1840 to 1845 mention at least 67 vessels being donated to science, a phrase used to describe the sale of murdered followers' bodies. This not only removed evidence, but brought in revenue and gave Silas access to advanced medical texts. Through these connections, he learned techniques to preserve bodies better and inflict pain without leaving visible marks, skills he then applied during church rituals. By 1845, the Church of the Pure Spirit had become something much darker than a fringe religious group. It had evolved into a complex system built on indoctrination, ritual murder, and profit, all under the protection of religious freedom. Federal investigators later described it as a machine of evil operating in plain sight, but rumors had begun to spread. Too many people had vanished after joining the church. Former members who had escaped rarely spoke about their experiences, but their fear and silence only fed suspicion. The turning point came from a postal inspector named James Thornhill, who stumbled onto the church while investigating financial discrepancies. That, combined with testimony from a former member and a chance encounter with a suspicious physician, would eventually shine a light on what had remained hidden for so long. For now, the Ravencrofts' operation remained intact, their secrets buried beneath a carefully maintained facade of faith, charity, and devotion. But the reckoning was beginning to take shape. Before we continue, if you're finding this investigation into America's darker religious history compelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from. Now, let's return to the unfolding story of the Church of the Pure Spirit. During the late 1840s, the church appeared to reach its peak. The Ravencroft brothers had built a sizable compound with dormitories, family homes, workshops, and even a school for members' children. Visitors were often impressed by what they saw: a well-organized, thriving religious community. The brothers made sure only trusted outsiders were allowed on the grounds, usually potential converts or influential locals. To the public, the church emphasized prayer, work, and unity. What wasn't visible were the rituals happening in secret and the growing number of deaths labeled as ascensions. Also hidden was the wealth the brothers were accumulating through donations, business operations, and the illegal sale of bodies. The first real crack in their facade came in 1847, when Thornhill noticed strange cash deposits linked to the church amounts, too large and too irregular to be personal donations. He also found money flowing to medical schools under vague labels like research funds. Thornhill's investigation might have ended there, focused only on financial wrongdoing, if he hadn't met Martha Simmons, a former member who had fled after witnessing her sister's elevation. Though hesitant at first, she eventually told him about the rituals, the bodies, the children taken for blessings and never seen again. Her story was so extreme that Thornhill admitted he might not have believed it, except it matched the financial records. He took the matter to his superiors, but they were reluctant to act without hard evidence, and with the legal protections around religious freedom. The matter stalled. Thornhill continued collecting information privately, building a network around Ravenwood. One of his most valuable sources turned out to be Dr. William Garrett, a physician in Albany. Garrett had received cadavers from the church and was disturbed by what he found: signs of torture, healed injuries, and consistent causes of death indicating suffocation and stress. In 1850, he gave Thornhill medical reports on 7 such bodies, the first hard proof that something terrible was happening. But even that wasn't enough to move authorities to action. The breakthrough came in 1851, when Prophet Caleb's mental condition, long deteriorating, suddenly collapsed. Witnesses say he began hallucinating, claiming to see spirits and the divine anatomy in midair. His public appearances were reduced, and he was eventually confined to a remote underground room. That would have kept things quiet if Caleb hadn't escaped. On June 17, 1851, Caleb broke free and emerged in the Ravenwood town square during a summer festival. Naked, bleeding from self-inflicted wounds, he began shouting about the rituals, the chambers, and the sacred blood of the purified. Locals were horrified. He claimed 27 had been elevated and that more would follow. Initially treated as a madman, he was arrested. But when authorities learned his identity, everything changed. Thornhill was contacted immediately and rushed to Ravenwood. Caleb alternated between silence and manic confessions, offering maps of the tunnels and pointing to the Chamber of Saints. Finally, Thornhill had enough evidence for an official investigation. But word of Caleb's arrest reached the other brothers. First, they acted fast. That same night, Ezra and Silas began a cover-up plan detailed in church records as the cleansing flame. Inner Circle members destroyed financial records, moved bodies, and set a controlled fire in the church. By the time officials arrived on June 19th, they found the church partially burned and members busy with cleanup. Ezra welcomed them, blaming Caleb's breakdown and the fire as tragic misfortunes. "We will rebuild," he said, Faith must rise from ashes. Despite the damage, investigators eventually accessed the underground chambers. Some had been flooded with water from a diverted stream, others stripped clean. But even with much destroyed, what remained confirmed Caleb's claims. They found torture devices, embalming chemicals, and most damning, the remains of dozens of victims. The Chamber of Saints revealed skeletons posed in prayer, corpses arranged in seated positions, and small rooms filled with children's remains. Even experienced investigators were shaken, though the brothers denied knowledge of Caleb's actions. Their defense fell apart when investigators uncovered a hidden ledger in Silas's quarters. It listed every elevation, including names, dates, methods, and how remains were handled. Ezra was mentioned repeatedly as selecting candidates. This, combined with earlier testimonies, sealed their fate on July 3, 1851. Ezra and Silas Ravencroft were arrested for murder, fraud, and desecration of human remains. The trial that followed would shock the nation, even as some of the worst details were kept from the public to avoid a moral panic. But even as justice began to catch up to the Ravencrofts, more disturbing truths continued to surface. What began in Ravenwood had roots far deeper than anyone first imagined. Received from the church showed that the subjects had been studied anatomically before they died, as if their bodies were prepared for experimentation while still alive. This disturbing revelation added a horrifying new layer to the case. The Ravencroft brothers weren't just murdering their followers in the name of religious purity. They were using them as living test subjects, carefully documenting the results and selling both the bodies and their notes to medical institutions. According to Dr. Samuel Prescott of Albany Medical College, the types of injuries, tissue preservation techniques, and the detailed notes all point to a systematic effort to study human reactions, especially to pain and its impact on the body's systems. Then, in August of 1851, the case took another dramatic turn. A well-known Boston physician, Dr. Jonathan Crane, came forward with information that changed the investigation entirely. Back in the 1820s, while attending Harvard Medical School, Crane had encountered a guest lecturer named Simon Ravencroft. This man had presented deeply controversial theories on the relationship between pain and religious ecstasy. His methods and ideas disturbed me even then, Crane testified. He talked about pain as a way to reach spiritual transcendence. At the time, I wrote him off as a medical crank, but when I saw the sketches in the paper, I recognized not only his ideas, but his face. Simon Ravencroft and Silas Ravencroft are the same person. That realization reshaped how investigators viewed the Church of the Pure Spirit. It wasn't just a cult built around religious control or violence. It was a carefully constructed belief system designed to enable and justify human experimentation. The faith wasn't an excuse for the science. It was the science. Soon after, investigators discovered a hidden room beneath Deacon Silas's quarters, filled with hundreds of journals, each one detailing anatomical sketches, experimental setups, and notes. The entries covered decades of research, shifting from religious language to purely scientific terms as time went on. One especially haunting passage from 1848 read, Subject 157 remained conscious for 47 minutes. After removal of redacted, heart continued function for 12 minutes, post-loss of consciousness. Blood loss approximately 1.7 L. Findings support hypothesis regarding endurance of vital systems under extreme conditions. When Elder Ezra was confronted with this evidence, the mask finally slipped. According to interrogation transcripts, he laughed for nearly a full minute before saying, "You understand nothing. The Spirit has many names. Some call it God, others science. We simply pursued knowledge others were too frightened to seek. Our followers were elevated. Their suffering had purpose. Their deaths had meaning." This revelation shocked the medical community. Respected institutions that had received bodies or research from the Ravencrofts now faced scrutiny, triggering a national debate over medical ethics and accountability. As autumn arrived, investigators resumed digging beneath the church. Initially, they had based victim counts on Prophet Caleb's claim of 217 vessels, but that estimate was far too low. By September, Blackwood reported at least 276 bodies had been found. Soil analysis suggested even more remained buried beneath neighboring properties. The Ravencrofts had been expanding their underground network as their operation grew. The investigation took another dark turn with the discovery of letters showing that not all the victims had joined the church willingly. Correspondence between Elder Ezra and associates in nearby towns revealed a disturbing recruitment system. Travelers, immigrants, and the socially isolated were targeted. One letter read, "The red-haired Irishman from last Thursday will make an excellent vessel. No family. Strong constitution. I've directed him to Ravenwood for mill work. Expect him by Saturday." What had initially seemed like a story of religious fanaticism now looked more like organized abduction, murder, and unethical experimentation with profit and academic recognition as added incentives. And it may not have ended there. The biggest break came in October 1851 when investigators located Samuel Parsons, the church's former accountant. He had worked for the Ravencrofts from 1835 to 1849, then vanished under a false name. Given immunity, he described discovering financial records that tied specimen preparation and research grants to missing members of the congregation. "I thought I was handling donations," he explained, "but once I saw the truth, I fled with nothing but the clothes I wore." Parsons provided critical details from memory, names of buyers, institutions, wealthy patrons, and even church insiders. Most crucially, he revealed the existence of a second site, a remote farmhouse, 40 miles from Ravenwood. Ezra called it the Garden. Parsons said, "Only he, Silas, and 2 others ever went there. Supplies were sent, monthly chemicals, restraints, medical tools, and people, always at night. None ever returned." When investigators searched the farmhouse, they found something even worse than the horrors beneath the church. It had been transformed into a research facility, with rooms dedicated to specific types of experiments. The records confirmed long-term testing on live subjects, weeks or even months of continuous procedures. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that children had been among the subjects. A separate building on the property contained small cells and medical tools made for juveniles. Records indicated at least 37 children, ages 4 to 16, had been held at the site between 1840 and 1851. The public outrage that followed was explosive. Newspapers ran graphic headlines, "Monsters in human form," and called for swift justice. Even the Ravencroft brothers, who had seemed composed throughout the investigation, began to crack. Ezra started talking to unseen figures in his cell. Silas attempted suicide after learning the farmhouse had been discovered. By the end of 1851, the case had become a national scandal. The brothers' trial was scheduled for January 1852, and the questions only deepened. How could they have gone undetected for so long? Who helped them? And was this the full extent of their operation, or just the part we'd managed to uncover? Blackwood's journal from December summed it up. "We have likely uncovered only the surface. The Ravencrofts are guilty, but I believe they were part of something bigger, something that still remains hidden." He couldn't have known how right he was. The impact of the brothers' actions left a lasting mark on America's collective memory. But beyond public fear and fascination, their influence continued through followers who had slipped through the cracks. Between 1865 and 1890, at least 7 fringe religious groups were identified across the country, all echoing parts of the Church of the Pure Spirit's teachings. None of them matched the original church's scale or brutality, but their existence showed that the Ravencroft doctrines had outlived their creators. One of the most notable offshoots was discovered in 1879 deep in rural Missouri. A preacher who called himself Brother Elijah had formed a small commune based on the idea of spiritual enlightenment through suffering. When local authorities began investigating reports of disturbing activity, they found ritual tools and written material that directly referenced the Ravencroft brothers. Brother Elijah was later identified as Thomas Whitfield, a former member of the church's inner circle. Rather than face arrest, he took his own life. The final confirmed chapter of the Ravencroft case came decades later, in 1899. That year, Harvard Medical School received a mysterious donation, an iron box filled with journals, anatomical sketches, and experimental notes spanning from 1852 to 1898. Handwriting analysis confirmed that the most recent entries were written by Elder Ezra himself, though they showed signs of age and physical decline. The last dated entry, written on December 31, 1898, read, "As the century closes, so too does my work in this vessel. Time has succeeded where law could not. I go now to join the pure spirit, satisfied that the seeds we planted have taken root and will bloom in ways we only imagined. The next generation will carry on the work of transcendence. The suffering was necessary. The knowledge endures. The spirit continues." Whether this was truly written by Ezra or a carefully crafted forgery has never been confirmed. If genuine, it would suggest he lived to the improbable age of 115. But more important than the author's identity was the content itself, detailed scientific methods and data that appeared to influence early 20th century medical research. Despite their horrific origins, parts of the brothers' work had seemingly found their way into legitimate science. Harvard quickly sealed the materials. In 1902, after consulting federal officials, the entire collection was moved to a secure government archive, where it remained classified until 1972. That year, limited access was granted to researchers studying the history of medical ethics. Back in Ravenwood, the site of the original church sat untouched for decades. In 1923, the state of New York declared it a restricted area, fenced it off, and posted warnings against trespassing. Local rumors began to circulate, stories of strange lights, eerie sounds, and feelings of dread near the grounds. In 1967, a research team from the State University of New York conducted the first serious archaeological dig at the site, using modern equipment to explore areas previously inaccessible. What they uncovered was alarming. More human remains hidden in forgotten tunnels, pushing the estimated death toll to over 400, far more than the 276 officially recorded. Even more troubling was the discovery of a sealed room containing documents that detailed plans for expanding the operation beyond Ravenwood. The documents suggested that the Church of the Pure Spirit had always been intended as just the beginning part of a broader plan to establish similar groups across the country and possibly abroad. A vision Ezra may have continued to pursue. Long after his escape, more than 160 years after the Ravencroft case first came to light, its shadow still lingers in the field of religious studies. The brothers are cited as an extreme case of how charismatic leadership, step-by-step normalization of deviant behavior, and a hunger for spiritual meaning can lead to horrifying consequences. In the medical world, their legacy became a pivotal example of why strong ethical guidelines are essential in scientific research. Criminal psychologists also view them as early examples of systematic, organized killers who managed to operate under the cover of religious legitimacy and institutional respectability. But for the families and communities who were directly affected, the Ravencroft brothers represent something more personal, a deep wound in American history that never fully healed. Today, descendants of their victims still hold an annual gathering at a small memorial in Albany. Established in 1902, the stone bears a single line: "For those lost to darkness, that their suffering not be forgotten." The same questions that haunted investigator Blackwood back in 1852 remain relevant. How did the Ravencroft brothers build their twisted blend of faith and science? Who helped them? Who looked the other way? And perhaps most unsettling of all, how much of their influence still survives today, hidden in institutions or ideas we trust. The true horror of their story doesn't lie only in the crimes themselves, but in what those crimes reveal that, under certain conditions, when belief, power, and ambition align, ordinary people and respected systems can enable the unthinkable. To this day, the land where the church once stood remains untouched. The trees around it are still, the air strangely quiet. Locals say that even on calm nights, something about the ground feels off, as if it's still holding onto something that refuses to fade. Stories like this show how fragile civilization can be when authority is misused, and how easily science and faith can be twisted when there's no moral compass guiding them. What do you think? Was everything truly uncovered? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. And as always, share this with someone who loves a good mystery. See you in the next one.